This is way too much. Good evening and welcome to Stones and Thrones. My name is Nicholas A. Vena and this is my show. I analyze and talk about current events in society, culture, and political news in pursuit of the good things to which we can hold fast and build upon, stone by stone, until myself and like-minded individuals have thrones that last. Occasionally, I'll respond to stones that are thrown at me, and sometimes I'll be throwing some stones of my own. Tonight's topics are justice. Justice in these issues of the race war that seems to be pending and brewing and stirring up, and justice in terms of the gender wars that also seems to be pending, stirring, and brewing up, both of them being exacerbated, getting worse, broadening, and showing up in everybody's timelines if you're on X. So on X, what you have here is from the poster, goes by the name of King Roy. He appears to be in Arkansas. He does have almost 400,000 followers. So here's the take, according to him, which I don't really take issue with. I had a response to, and I'll probably just read it for the sake of brevity here. But here's what he wrote. He said, Nolan Wells' death is all over my timeline. I'm seeing mostly Black folks talking about it and saying this is a cautionary tale for why Black parents should side-eye these kinds of friendships where their child is, quote, the only Black kid, end quote, in white spaces. What looks like acceptance and belonging could end up being a trap. 4th of July, Mississippi, an island, water, a cluster of white boys. One Black boy is missing. Nobody bothered to report him missing. That combination of facts lands in the Black imagination with historical weight and triggers our collective nervous system. Black people are not reacting in a vacuum. We carry a whole archive of similar stories. We know what water has meant. We know what boys being boys has covered. Boys being boys is in quotes. We know what, quote, accident, end quote, has sometimes been asked to explain. We know how many Black deaths have become official shrugs because the living white witnesses were granted innocence before the dead Black youth was granted humanity. Now, that does not mean we know what happened here, but it does mean we know why Black folk are suspicious. So you can take that for what it is. It's pretty straightforward insofar as there is a sentiment being expressed that this is a long-standing woe suffered by the Black community at the hands of whites in conspicuous and mysterious circumstances where you could end up dead just being surrounded by white people. And even though in this situation, according to King Roy here, even though in this situation, you don't know for sure what all the details are, there is a consternation, and it's justified not just by, not just in the absence of facts related to this case, but by history that is not articulated here either. So I'm just going to read my response because I've already drafted it, and it's more concise this way than trying to do it again from memory. So my thoughts and what I pointed out was this. I said, whatever the specifics may be, however justified the angst or anger might be, no one benefits from the presumption of patently false assertions, nor from the insinuations that utterly ordinary and safe circumstances are somehow dangerous, let alone possess some long-standing historical quality of danger or risk, which just was a way of saying that the insinuations that there is this long-standing woe is just not accurate. There isn't evidence that supports that, and there's a reason why that matters. I went on that white-on-black violence is extremely rare. It's a fact. And anywhere a particular instance occurs, it's even rarer that race played a part. So yes, there are instances where whites are committing acts of violence against Blacks. They are very rare, and even amongst those rare instances, race is not typically a motivator. Conversely, Black on white violence has become an epidemic, and it is significantly exacerbated by racial tensions, and the violence is often racially motivated, like after the man who murdered Irina Zaritska said, "I got that white girl." That would constitute a racially motivated act of violence. Further, the chorus of Black voices in people's timelines are basically rage bait, hardly credible as authentic, and completely detrimental as regards this specific case. Here's this specific case. A group of kids went out, one didn't come back. The circumstances are conspicuous. These kids are rightly identified as suspects in a potential crime. They are rightly identified as prime suspects. The post-event conduct of the kids speaks to issues of privilege and legitimately and reasonably gives way to concern of corruption and raise the specter these proceedings could be tainted before they start. Government corruption is an issue. Exploitation of privilege and the disenfranchised alike are also issues. Protected classes and tribalism are also issues. This has nothing to do with racism or a racist disposition or the devaluation of Blacks or the preferential treatment of whites. It is a political pecking order, not a race one, and betrays a deeply corroded institutional application of law in crime and punishment. So many issues to address and clean up in America. The race tensions aren't only a distraction, they insulate the real enemy, which are the corrupt devices and instruments of a country and a body of governance that not only has lost the confidence of the population, but by all accounts, no longer works. So that's not intended to be wordy. That's just my actual off-the-cuff reaction to what was written. Didn't have to think or analyze too much. That's all pretty much just right there at the ready in my own cognitive processes, because I've paid attention to this issue and a lot of issues like these for a long time. And the more of them you're exposed to, the more apparent it becomes that there is an underlying issue. It's not a race one. And the hyper focus on issues that are not actually causes, sometimes are not actually even related to what you're looking at, can serve to distract from what's actually true and can actually make things worse. They can stoke tensions between these groups. So in a nutshell, this all comes down to this issue of justice. In both cases, it comes down to justice. When you have a community, in this case, a Black community, you've also seen it with whites and you've heard it from whites recently too. So this is not exclusive to the Black community, but you do have longstanding issues of equal applications of law and justice and injustice when it comes to Black communities. That's a very well known fact, and it's would be impossible to dispute. Anybody who was alive or aware of the Rodney King trial, or who was alive and aware of the Reginald Denny, or the trial for the perpetrators of the crime against Reginald Denny, anybody who was alive and or aware of the OJ Simpson trial, and a whole bunch, Trayvon Martin, just the list goes on and on. And at root, it's an issue of justice. So even stepping back there from there for a second briefly, justice, the concept of justice, as treated in secular society and even in a religious and theological sense, is when someone gets what they deserve, more or less. In terms of reward, recognition, or punishment. But generally speaking, it's about receiving what you are owed or what is due to you. So when one receives what one is due, that would be a matter or a manifestation, an expression of justice. And when someone does not receive what they are owed, or if they receive a punishment that they don't deserve, then that becomes a matter of justice and an expression or manifestation of injustice. Thomas Aquinas points out that anger, the human emotion of anger, is directly related to and inseparable from our concept of justice, which is a supernatural virtue, not something natural to creation or human nature, but is actually a supernatural virtue. So, for example, if my dog steals something from another dog, that dog may react, may become territorial, it may resource guard, it may act out in violence, it may just look for an opportunity to sneak it back, but there's nothing that takes place between two dogs in a situation that a human would look at and observe as a form of injustice that indicates that the dogs are actually getting angry about it or taking it personally. Okay? That doesn't really factor into the psychology of an animal, even though they may react and express things that look to us to be that way. It's not a matter of the supernatural virtue of justice where a dog is saying, you took that from me and that's not right. It's not fair. Their reactions are much more instinctive and genetic from the perspective of if the dog has an appetite or an affection for something or is hungry and you take its food, it's going to have a violent reaction, even if the food you're taking from it is food that it had just taken from you or from someplace else moments earlier. So it's not a matter of justice with animals. It is a matter of justice with humans. The human affection associated, the emotion associated with the sense of injustice and the righteous anger that's associated with it is derivative of the supernatural virtue of justice. So that's where things like proportionality come into play about, is it really an eye for an eye or a tooth for a tooth, or does someone have an excessive reaction where it's like 2 eyes for 1 eye, or all your teeth for 1 teeth, or all your limbs for a finger? That's an issue too. I think we see that. I know there's a lawyer at a big firm in San Diego that I've had some run-ins with before, who has publicly written about, as a Zionist, that there's no way that the state of Israel could be expected to respond proportionally to provocations in the Middle East. He actually wrote about this. He elaborated on it at length. He's an attorney, and he used to work for the Department of Justice. He's been the president of the Anti-Defamation League. So this is not some obscure figure. It's someone who is very well learned, very well studied, a lot of experience, well practiced as an attorney. And he put forth this proposition. And from his perspective, it was actually obnoxious to think that the state of Israel should be limited to responding proportionately to provocations, and even went so far as to say they don't even need to be provoked in order to take action that would be considered disproportionate, even from a preemptive or anticipatory perspective. So this runs deep. It runs everywhere. It runs through all different levels of society. So as is the case with these crimes and these high-profile trials, what you have are built-up tensions from the perception of a long-standing injustice and the cause that is being appropriated to. And those are separate things. So we have to distinguish between the two. I could, in fact, be a long-standing victim of unfair practice or injustice, deprived of what I'm due, or have had things imposed upon me that are unfair that I have not deserved, and at the same time be ascribing all of that injustice to a cause that isn't actually real, is not actually the real cause, and isn't actually at root of the injustices that are taking place. So there's layers to this. There's what is actually taking place, which people can get wrong. They can misunderstand what is actually taking place. Did this person actually do what you think they did? Then there's the disposition of the subject, the one to whom it is happening to has a disposition. That disposition could be accurate or not accurate. They may actually deserve something that they don't think that they deserve, or they may not deserve something that they do believe that they deserve. So the next layer is their disposition. There's whatever is actually happening and their perception of it, and then there's their disposition as to the warrantedness or fairness or justice of what's actually taking place. The layer after that is whether or not it's actually being appropriated or ascribed to the actual source of it, the actual motivation behind what's happening. So let me apply this to the situation with this individual who lost his life and the Black community who's reacting to it, the white community who's reacting to it, and the Black and white communities reacting to each other, reacting to it. There is no pattern. There's no long-standing pattern, not publicly anyway, of groups of whites around single or smaller groups of Blacks, wherein that fact alone is correlated or can be correlated or would lead with some, level of probability that there's going to be harm come to the Black or Blacks in that situation. It has happened before, but it's not a long-standing, repetitive issue. Just look at the examples that I provided earlier. Rodney King was one Black individual surrounded by a group of white male cops beating the shit out of him. So you could look at that and you could say, oh, look, it's one Black guy and a bunch of white men, when in reality it's like, no, that is one guy and a bunch of cops. It is one Black guy, it is a bunch of white cops, but the fundamental issue at root is these are cops and this is a Black man. And it's in Los Angeles where there is more crime committed proportionately by Black men than by whites. So you have that tension there. But again, it's not related to the fact that he is Black. It's related to the fact that he demographically is more closely associated with crimes and violent crimes. So there's a big difference. You could stereotype somebody where you are reacting to the stereotype that's associated with the demographic and not the demographic itself. In fact, the other trial, the one with OJ Simpson, bears that out. OJ Simpson was notoriously known for being antagonistic towards the Black community. He never associated with the Black community. They saw him as neglecting a social responsibility to help his own. And in his mind, they weren't his own. He was a USC grad. He was a football player, a football star, Heisman Trophy winner, a massive success in professional sports and in professional media, television and movies and commercials. He lived in a white community with white people, came from a primarily white school, and more or less carried on as if he was a white guy. And there was a matter of status where the manner in which he was treated, approached, responded to, and perceived was fundamentally related to fame, wealth, pedigree, accolades. So at the end of the day, he did prevail in a criminal murder trial. He did, in fact, prevail with the jury, largely because he was Black. But it could not be argued that if he was not rich and famous and in the communities that he was, with the accolades that he had and the pedigree that he had, that he probably would not have been exonerated. Because even the Black community would not have just rallied around no one. He was a figurehead and became symbolic for something that they associated a long-standing pattern of injustice with. And it wasn't just a long-standing pattern of injustice with whites. It was a long-standing pattern of injustice with the LAPD, which they perceived to be against Blacks, not just against criminals or anybody, but against Blacks in particular, as it related to investigations, treatment, process, and prosecution of crimes, and particularly the manner in which it occurred with Black alleged criminals. Okay, so hopefully you follow all of that. These are all like very different, very distinct things. As another example, Reginald Denny, what were they angry about? There was no question that this was a completely innocent white dude who didn't really do anything that would have warranted getting dragged out of his truck and beat within inches of his life. No one disputes that. Even the Black community that was incensed by the conviction of the Black men who beat him up never made the argument that Reginald Denny was guilty of anything. The fundamental basis for their anger was the white men who had ganged up on and beat within an inch of his life, Rodney King, were exonerated. They were not convicted, and they're free. And the Black men who had beat up Reginald Denny in retaliation for the failure to convict those officers, in their minds, was just. So you can see the disposition and how that affects the way people think, right? They knew Reginald Denny did not commit any crime. They knew he had not done anything to the people who beat him within an inch of his life. They knew that. However, they imposed a disposition on the perpetrators, the ones who beat up Reginald Denny, a disposition that was owed leniency. That was the assertion they made. These guys beat up Rodney King and got away with it, so it's only fair if a group from our community beats the shit out of a white guy and gets away with it. Do you follow? Like, that's how that works. So their perception of the injustice that took place and the disposition of the victim, right? Even if you look briefly at the perception of the injustice, these were different situations. Rodney King was, in fact, going over 100 miles an hour. He was, in fact, endangering the lives around him. He was, in fact, resisting arrest. He was, in fact, refusing all of the verbal orders that were being exhibited against him or directed towards him. He was, in fact, on PCP. He did, in fact, represent a form of threat. And so the injustice that actually took place is totally different than it was being imagined by the community at that time. The injustice that was taking place was it was not necessary for so many officers to be beating on one dude. They could have subdued him with less force. It was not necessary to use batons, which are incredibly powerful and can be swung with an incredible amount of force, and they are solid steel bars, basically. It wasn't necessary to be doing that over and over and over again, and it wasn't even necessary for them to be taking turns the way that they were taking. You had video footage of it. Rodney King is in the center. One guy comes in and hits him. The next guy comes in and hits him. Like they were playing a game and taking turns. So that was the injustice. The injustice was this is an outrageous exhibition of excessive and unnecessary force insofar as what they were supposed to be doing. Two, these are police officers, not citizens. This wasn't a gang war. If it was a group of gang members, even white gang members, doing the exact same thing in the exact same way, even if for the exact same reason, that is, even if it was to protect the community or because of the driving or the PCP or whatever else, it still would be different because the officers swear an oath. They swear an oath. They have a duty and an obligation to protect citizens and to use force when necessary in the furtherance of the mission to protect and serve citizens. So the guilt of those officers actually even exceeded the bounds of the injustice that was taking place against Rodney King in those moments. So what actually happened, the perception of the subject, the individual to whom it happened, the perception of what happened, the disposition, like what do I think I'm owed or not owed, and then what is fair and just in terms of, well, in civil litigation, it would just be financial compensation. In this case, since there was a criminal proceeding, Rodney King would have reasonably been looking for a conviction, some type of punishment, not a blanket wholesale exoneration, which was more or less what they got. So that's a major issue on that side. And when you have this jury in the OJ Simpson trial, they're not just thinking about, you did this to Rodney King, we're going to get you back. You guys didn't let us, kill Reginald Denny, so we're going to get you back. They are thinking about this long-standing, unequal application of the law, a long-standing, mounting, increasingly outrageous injustice. And it was an injustice that got framed as white on black. Here are the consequences of that. Nicole Brown Simpson, dead. So that was the victim. So when OJ Simpson is on trial, these criminal proceedings for the murder of Nicole Brown Simpson, also Ron Goldman, I can touch on that last because that's sort of where justice kind of made its way back in. But they had no basis to have any negative view of her whatsoever. Their perception was, we are retaliating against the white community for a corporate crime committed against our community. So when you step back and you really think about this, the individual players, OJ Simpson, gets out of jail for free. For what? For being black. Even though he hates the black community and is actually racist. If you listen to the things that he said and the testimony of the friends that he did say and act out racist dispositions towards blacks, not towards whites. He benefited in this situation and is roundly understood to have actually almost irrefutably been guilty of murdering two people. Nicole Brown Simpson totally denied justice in that situation. For what? Not because anybody cared about her or liked her or even knew anything about her. The jury did not exonerate OJ because they didn't like Nicole. They completely disregarded her. They completely disregarded the crime, except for the relevance that it had to the implementation of their own justice. So to them, the crime itself was the occasion and the opportunity to exonerate him, not to convict him. That was the only relevance of the crime. So think that through and process what that means. Not only did they not hold the crime against him, but the crime itself became an asset for the community corporately to inflict vengeance on another community corporately, in this case, whites inflicting a vengeance on blacks blacks inflicting this revenge on whites for actual injustices that did take place, actual injustices that took place against the black community. But without considering that the injustices that were taking place against the black community were not taking place because it was a black community, and it was not an injustice being inflicted by a white community. It was an injustice, a corporate level injustice being inflicted by a legal community against a disenfranchised, lower economic community. The nuance matters because the legal system, that's the grand irony. It was through a perversion of the role and authority that that jury had in the legal system that exonerated a black criminal, a black murderer, even though there was no doubt that he had in fact murdered and was guilty of murder of an innocent white woman. And the instrumentation of this, which was an injustice for OJ Simpson because he was not deserving of an exoneration, it wasn't his due. It was an act of mercy for him. It was not justice for Nicole Simpson either, because she didn't actually do anything that would warrant the death penalty. So the legal system became an instrument to inflict a punishment on a known innocent person to the benefit of a known guilty person, because the perspective and perception of the group of people who made an instrument of the legal system in order to do this was that they were balancing the scales of a corporate injustice inflicted on their community by another community. Knowing that none of the people in that courtroom, not the judge, not the lawyers, not the officers of the court, none of the jury members ever leveled the accusation that they were the victims of conduct of anybody in that room upon whom they were taking out this vengeance. So apply that to what's going on right now in these two cases. These dudes were friends. That's what we know. How good of friends were they? I don't know. How good of friends is any group of 18 and 19-year-olds? But they were friends. They were friends to the extent that they were hanging out. They were friends to the extent that they referred to each other as friends. They were friends to the extent that they went out on this boat together and something happened. And this man ended up dead. The observations about this situation that immediately impose race on it is a catastrophe. It is destructive. It is a distraction, and it perpetuates the centers of power that are actually responsible for the injustices that stoke these racial tensions. So, wrap your head around that again. Every time a situation like this occurs, and you have these racial groups misappropriating the guilt of corporate slights that they perceive and misperceive on both sides, you perpetuate the problem and you even make it worse. You actually make it worse by making it easier for the real culprits to continue to commit these crimes. So let's hone in on those details. What are people upset about? Well, this group of kids came back, and it sounds like there is confusion about why and when there was actually a notification, or why there wasn't a notification that the guy was missing. There are stories that attempt to explain that with, oh, he was with a girlfriend. So the position is we didn't even expect that was something we even needed to do. It's not even something we considered like he was missing. He wasn't with us anymore because he was with some girl. I don't know if that's true. Whether or not it's true, it doesn't even matter. It's the only information that you have. So that's not a there. That's not something to focus on. That's certainly not a race issue. What is an issue, more notable, is that the kids that survived have a connection to a judge in that community, in that legal system, who would obviously have communication with other judges in that courthouse. Some of those kids have obtained lawyers, and this looks substantially different than any other situation where you have a similar fundamental issue or event, which is a group of kids went out and not all of them came back. One of them is gone and then was discovered to be dead. Okay, that could just as easily have been one disappears, the other three go to law enforcement, go to the media. We can't find our friend. We lost our friend. We need help. We need to get the word out. This is what he looks like. Here's a picture. Do you recognize him? Have you seen him? Where did you see him? When was the last time? Is he okay? That's all we want to know. That situation happens all the time. Okay, so that's what's different. It's not different because it was a group of white guys and one black guy. It's totally irrelevant. And it's irrelevant not because race never matters, but because there is no pattern of groups of white guys committing acts of violence against single black men. Not it's never happened. It's not a pattern. It's not a structural, societal, known pattern with mysterious origins and mysterious conclusions. That's not real. So to focus on that is nothing other than either rage bait or stoking race tensions for either no good reason at all or for some reason that's actually more sinister than if it was a bad reason. So it's irrelevant. But what gets overlooked in the process is why are you lawyered up? Okay? Even that is not an absolute issue, because anytime you're being suspected of a crime, you should have a lawyer, period. Period. Because false incarcerations and false convictions are not nearly as rare or as uncommon as you might need to believe in order to sleep well at night. Anybody who has been in the legal system and seen a legal proceeding take place with their own eyes knows what I'm talking about, and they know that it's true. Anybody who has not been in a legal proceeding knows nothing. They know nothing because we have a theoretical, conceptual understanding of what life is in a court of law with lawyers and judges and evidence. And that experience is based on books or television or movies or secondhand. And it's nothing like that. It is nothing like that. I can't emphasize it enough. It's nothing like that. There's rampant corruption in courtrooms, and it's so rampant and so pervasive that the vast majority of what they do, what these officers of the court, lawyers, bailiffs, clerks, business office staff, judges themselves, all of them, court professionals, court appointed experts, forensic experts, forensic witnesses, expert witnesses, um, other professional services like law enforcement, emergency medical services or emergency respondents, hospitals, especially if they liaison with law enforcement or EMTs or EMRs, every single layer of it. Watch the Karen Read trial. Look at the number of people who said, I heard her say this, when it was a matter of life or death and a life sentence. And they didn't hear her say that because she didn't actually say it. And then they admitted later that they had testified to hearing her say something that they knew she didn't say when they testified to it. If you have not been in that seat, you cannot understand. If you don't know someone who's been in that seat, you cannot understand. So even if you watch the documentary, which you ought to, there's more than one, you'll get a sense of it. Watch the Amanda Knox trial. There's a number of things in her case. So the legal system is not what people think it is. And there's good reason to be suspicious or fearful, but that's the culprit here. That is the source of the angst and the anger. The reason why Black communities are anxious when it comes to crimes and legal proceedings is because there is a shit ton of corruption in those institutions. And the lower the income, the more disproportionately you are affected by that corruption for a number of reasons, including a devaluing of you for being poor, not for being Black, including it's easier to get away with it. And even things that are way worse than you would imagine in terms of laziness. Like you will literally have horrible things take place in legal proceedings, in investigations by law enforcement, simply out of laziness, impropriety, up to corruption, straight up to, bribery and things where, like, if you really knew it, you would think that there should be an automatic imposition of a death penalty on any government official who is corrupt and abuses the power, the authority that they have. We see that actually in all sorts of laws. You see that even with statutory rape situations where the person is in a position of authority is treated differently than someone who's not, with good reason. So that issue is a big one. It's been flooding everybody's timelines for a couple of days, and we need to start reframing how we look at these things and better understand what's going on. And even for myself, me included, when I jump in there, I think it's even on my profile, I will occasionally rage bait rage baiters as a form of like provocation, like rhetorical provocation in my own mind to with the intention, the aim sometimes of getting people to just think more seriously about what they're doing, what they're saying, what the implications and consequences could be. But also sometimes just to dampen a fire, like with a flame retardant. When someone goes out there and just starts setting a flame ablaze with this super dangerous rhetoric, it is useful in a practical sense sometimes to just come with a heavy contrarian position, especially if you have it in numbers, to start dampening that fire. And it's a game that really no one should want to play if we don't have to, because it comes with a lot of risks. You don't know who's listening on the periphery or how they're reacting to what's being there. You don't know who is sensitive to one brand or flavor of rage bait, but then is sort of inoculated to other ones, and they completely misidentify what's taking place, and they could completely misidentify if or where or the degree that injustice is taking place. And they can also have radically outsized um, ideations about what would level the playing field or even the scales. So definitely something to think about. Really significant topics, especially as you see this identity politics issue becoming more and more volatile and more reckless, all just in this desperate battle to drive voters to the polls. And the things that these politicians and the machinations surrounding them will do to achieve that goal is borderline psychopathy. So I think that pretty much covers it. It's been much longer than I anticipated. I don't even think I need to get into the Sider case right now. I could do it maybe in a separate show just because that issue does warrant its own attention. These gender war issues and the feminist perception of what and where injustice is and who is responsible for it, unequal application of law, and even public sentiment, their whole concept of what the patriarchy is and what's justifiable in their war against it. So there's a lot that could be discussed there, but I think this is totally sufficient as far as addressing the issue of justice that I wanted to address that I didn't really get to in yesterday's show. I'm exhausted, feel like my voice is worn out. My goal was to be at 30 minutes. I'm closer to an hour. I think that's good. That should wrap it all up. So enjoy the what's left of this evening, which there's an hour left on the West Coast. So anyplace else, it's already over. It's tomorrow. Thanks for watching and peace out.